George, a very warm welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, John. Good being with you again.
Perfect. Well, you're most welcome. And whilst I provided a bit of a top line in my intro, it would be great for you as the head of the organisation to remind our listeners a little bit about BARSA's mandate, BARSA's membership base, and really what the big objective of the association is.
No, thank you, John. BARSA, I think in full, refers to the Board of Airline Representatives South Africa. So we share, membership with IATA, but at a local level, IATA being the bigger, global organization, but we represent the international airlines within the South African environment. We've got other associate members, such as your ground handlers. So we sit with about just over 42 members. We're the largest association in South Africa, just in terms of membership, because we've got a lot of international airlines that are all flying into the South African market. So our responsibility remains, John, negotiating all the economic activities involving our airlines within South Africa. That, for instance, we talk about the infrastructure, where infrastructure is regulated in the sense that you don't have competition in South Africa where you have multiple airports or multiple air traffic navigation systems. So they are regulated within a law, and they don't have to go through the competition law. So we monitor and continue to participate in ensuring that our members are protected so that they don't, these monopolies abusing their dominance in the market because they're the single service provider. So we've got that broader responsibility of ensuring that we're like a watchdog on behalf of the industry.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. So it's about creating some accountability and providing a platform for the two to come together and actually understand each other's side of the argument as much as anything else, because obviously you've got a supply side and a demand side of the business there. I also think it's great that we're doing this to preview the summit, because the summit, of course, is an opportunity to set course for the coming year, to negotiate, to have those meetings, to build those relationships. And ultimately, we all know that we need to have the relationships in place to be able to move forward in this respect, rather than seeing it as a sort of a combative relationship between the regulators, the airport operator, and the airlines themselves. That isn't in anybody's interest. So the theme for this year's summit is moving forwards, embracing accountability for a better future. And that's the word that really sticks out. And what you said initially is that whole thing about accountability, which is something, honestly, we do struggle with at many conferences. Sometimes we're preaching to the choir. Sometimes we don't necessarily record and agree what are the steps forward as a result of the background. So talk to us about the thinking behind the theme for this year.
No, certainly. The critical issue for us, I think, John, if you're aware, that this year is a year of elections for South Africa. And I think as a business, or in particular, the aviation sector as a whole, we believe we've got a greater role to play in terms of ensuring that there's a broader accountability in terms of the people that go in power, because it impacts on how we do business in South Africa. Having a number of international airlines, they obviously continuously assess whether South Africa is a desirable market for them to put their equipment into the South African environment. And for us, when we decided on this particular topic moving forward, embracing accountability for a better future is really, as a sector, to contribute towards what would ultimately determine the governing body of South Africa. That we've been, as a country, impacted by a number of issues. We're sitting with the rand to dollar exchange, which is at the highest. We sit with a number of geopolitical issues that are impacting on the country. Of course, as business, we don't decide who gets elected into government. It's not our responsibility to do that. It's the responsibilities of the citizens of South Africa. But we believe through dialogues and conversations in summits such as ours, we are able to contribute positively in terms of the kind of leadership that would propel and create prosperity for this country. So for us, we decided to have this type of dialogue. So it's not a blame back and forth type game that we want to engage on. We want to engage in contributing positively as a sector on what we believe or what should be embraced by the leadership of the country, embraced by our own ministry and all the stakeholders within our sector. One other thing that we decided to do this, John, was that accountability. Sometimes, as you rightly say, there's a debate about the accountability element. We always tend to think that accountability only applies to the public sector. So our thinking was to the extent that accountability also requires an obligation on the part of the private sector itself, be private airlines or international airlines operating into South Africa, that there is laws within the South African system. There is contribution we need to make, whether corporate social responsibilities and so on. So what level of accountability can we bring forward as an industry to contribute towards making South Africa a better country? So that's how we looked at this particular topic. But in particular, we were influenced by the elections that are coming probably in 2 months. And now the proclamation is out. We've got a date. We know quite soon the citizens of South Africa will be going out there to vote. If we can make some contribution somehow in terms of what we believe and where we want to see the aviation sector, because it's the biggest contributor, it's one of the creator of the South African economy in terms of tourism and so on and so on. I think it's important for our voice to be heard, John. Thank you.
Yeah, it's absolutely vital. You mentioned elections. I think I read somewhere that 60-70% of the globe is going to have an election in 2024. It's the year of change, the year of elections. So there's going to be a huge challenge. You've outlined, obviously, the geopolitical issues that are impacting South Africa and the rest of the world as well. And I think that whole accountability thing comes down to when we sit down and we can actually have a pragmatic and honest and open conversation to say, look, we're not piling on you here. Let's work out, let's be aware of what the environmental factors are, where we are right now, and what are we going to do about it? And let's agree a course forward. Whether the government changes, whether ministers change, we need to have a solid strategy, because it's too important as a sector, as you say, to South Africa to drive jobs, to drive tourism, to drive cultural exchange, and to provide that economic empowerment for the next generation as well, which is a big consideration. That's a nice place to move on to. We're sitting here end of February 2024. We've got the summit coming. When you were putting together the program, obviously that comes out of what are the biggest challenges, and that then sets what are the objectives of BARSA for 2024 and beyond. So tell us about that. What are the key objectives and the key challenges you're facing right now?
Look, there are just a number of issues. We need, in particular, certainty around the jet fuel market in South Africa. And there's two components to that. For as long as we operate into the different airports in South Africa, we need to ensure that there is fuel security. The high dependency on the overseas market in South Africa is becoming a challenge on its own. We've had a couple of refineries obviously closing down, practically left with 2 refineries, I think, out of the 6 or 7 that we had in the country. And we've seen, I think, a lot of the energy companies, as they are called today, moving away from the jet market refinery in the South African environment. But also, there is the 2050 obligations that the international airline would have to look at, the net zero carbon emission, which obviously looks at the sustainable aviation fuel. What is it from a policy direction? That's the certainty that we need. In terms of an engagement with government, we would want to contribute towards ensuring that there is a regulatory framework that determines the future of aviation. If there's obligations that international airlines have to comply with by a certain period, that can be done without our own governments participating and ensuring that there is infrastructure that supports the ability to comply with those regulations. It's an issue that we continue to believe that it needs to be looked at. As we said, again, purely from a business point of view, as an association, it's not only our interest to simply look at pointing out issues around regulatory issues that government may not be looking at, but the economy itself is really one other critical, challenging issue that we believe that we need to have a debate around it. We have Daniel Silk, whom, John, I think from your side you've used. Thanks to you having introduced us to Daniel. He's a great economist who would obviously, without any limitation, just give an impact of the global economy and the South African economy and where we play as South Africa in that regard. Because for as long as the economy is impacted, it impacts on airlines coming into the country, because obviously you look at the numbers, your PAX numbers and so on. It's just that kind of issue that we believe we should contribute towards ensuring that there are certain issues that at global level, such as geopolitical issues, that we may not be able to have control of. But I think as a country, there are certain things that we have control of. Those that we have control as a country, we would like to see our government really working hard towards having a better control to mitigate risks that are outside our own control, which are the global issues. It's another issue that we believe should be tackled. And I think as soon as the elections are done, and that's another conversation that we're hoping to have one particular professor, we're still in discussion with him, to come on board, who's just give us a sense of that level of stability that may be required going forward. Just from a leadership point of view, there is a concept around, or a panel discussion around the leadership. Why we think it's important is because in a democratic environment, we don't want to find ourselves going backwards, as some we've seen in other countries. We've been able for 30 years to build the kind of democracy that we have. There's tolerance in terms of having different views. I think there is a need for us to continuously instigate conversations around leadership as we build the young ones that are coming on board in the industry, because that then talks about the kind of democracy, or the maturity of democracy that we have. But as you would know, John, South Africa has the best democracy that we can criticize the president, we can criticize anybody at any given point in time without the fear of being harassed. And we want those kind of leadership discussions. That model must continue. That has been within the governing party, which is currently the African National Congress. So those are really the key issues. From an aviation point of view, I think we continue to engage with each other, with the different stakeholders, be it airports and navigation, to just address the issues that we believe needs to be addressed. I don't think those are the issues for the public forum, because at least we find each other, be it the Civil Aviation Authority and AXA or ATNS. We agree to disagree on matters, but we find each other. And for us, it's really the broader issues, John, that we believe needs to be debated, discussed. We've also took one of the thing that you did, John, that was very critical to the South African environment. It's just we never really look, and I think you've done that very well, just to look at the infrastructure, be it airport infrastructure. So we've got a topic in that regard that needs to be debated in terms of how do we participate in ensuring that we've got the best infrastructure to support the industry. If you travel in other countries, we're already far behind in terms of technology, in terms of how you process people going through your immigration services and so on and so on. How do we make sure that we support those kind of projects? It's that kind of a debate that we want to just elevate, because we have a user pay model, so that the industry itself, as the private sector, contributes towards making sure that this infrastructure is implemented. They understand why they need to have that, because there's no point in us complaining that there's a shortage of human resource in immigration when there's technology that can change how fast people can be processed in the system. So those are some of the issues that we thought, even the way we've structured some of the panel discussions, are intended to provoke those kind of discussions. Thank you, John.
Yeah, no, I think there's so many points on there. I think the first thing to say is you're not using the forum as a platform to score points. So you're not trying to embarrass anybody and create massive division. We're all adults and we've got to work together. So you do that behind closed doors. You have very robust discussions. It's not necessarily about that. The second thing that you said is about continuity. So if you've got a policy, as we do, to hit net zero 2050, which is IATA's goal, and obviously South Africa has its own ambitions, you can only do that if the leadership and there is continuity, even if the individuals change, that we're all aligned on that goal and we're not starting back from zero. So I think that's really important. The other point I picked up on is operating in isolation. So airlines can only reach their targets if they have the support of the infrastructure and the local stakeholders. Like you say, if there's no SAF provision, how can they uplift X amount of SAF? It's impossible. And you also want to guard against these oil companies having monopolies as well. If the refineries are closing and the supply is dropping, we all know what happens when supply drops and demand remains the same. The price is going to increase. I think all of these things, seeing them coming down the track and going, wow, there are lots of challenges, but practically, how are we going to get there? It's not about whose fault it is. It's about what do we do now to change that. And then the final thing that you brought up is, of course, we will have conversations, and it is a concern about airport charges, taxes, extra fees. But the idea of can we support the airports to generate more revenue from real estate, from other sources of income?
Yeah.
Something that, I know
Yeah.
a lot of the airports have done very well in South Africa, but specifically Durban and Dubai Trade Port have done a really great job down there of developing a whole ecosystem around the airport. And that's something we're very passionate about at AviaDev, because if you can get an airport to generate revenue from other sources, they don't have to lean so heavily on the airlines, the passengers, and everybody else to generate their revenues. And then we're all in a better place when we can bring those costs down. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm really energized and excited about the conversations that we're going to have. So in terms of some specifics, tell us, you've mentioned Daniel's going to do the macroeconomic, which is always such a great place to start. So I'm delighted you're using Daniel. But some of the other sessions and some of the key speakers, obviously everybody's important, but some of the sessions you'd like to highlight.
Just going to look at just looking at my program is that we will have a session, obviously, that talks about shaping regulations going forward. Just in a changing environment, we always believe that there's a need to make sure that your regulations are aligned to some of the developments that we see internationally, and also to look at the South African market on its own. So we've invited the regulators in that regard, those that regulate operating permits, whether be it in the domestic market, allocating routes, and so on. How best do we make sure that we create the necessary balance in terms of regulations that allow a better competition within the not only the South African market, but also ensuring that when we talk about bilateral agreements that get signed between governments, how do we make sure that those bilateral agreements are in touch with the industry itself? Because there's always that silo mentality. You find that you've got the International Licensing Council or the Domestic Licensing Council, or any of or ourselves as industry association representative, not being part of those bilateral discussions because they're taken at international level as agreements between government to government in terms of giving each other rights. Of course, there's aspects that obviously within the Department of Transport would deal with that and engage with the likes of tourism. But we would want to see a broader type engagement and maybe shaping a future and having a discussion. How best do we make sure that there is a broader stakeholder involvement, because we can bring some of the things that can activate a market in the absence of you having enough domestic airlines. We know that we speak about in Africa, we speak about SATAM, but how best do we have those kind of discussions that regulations would enable us? If we don't have a carrier in South Africa, how do we make sure that we partner with some of the African airlines to make sure that we do not necessarily protect our airspace unnecessarily, when we can enter into some type of agreements, be it code-sharing or even thinking outside the normal code-sharing to allow a market to be activated? Because, for instance, if I don't have a carrier, South African Airways, flying into some of the destination, but SAA can partner with Kenya Airways or any other airline in Africa that gets into South Africa, thinking of your freedom rides, and obviously being able to pick up passengers here, taking them somewhere else outside their or point of origin, which is Kenya. Those kind of discussions needs to be shaped into a broader discussion as the globe is moving towards a different way. We do understand about obviously ensuring that you've got enough of your local content protected and making sure domestic airlines have that, and we are for that. But it's those kind of discussions that we believe should come on board. Also, again, we've had the COVID issue. We believe that tourism remains a topical discussion that we need to have. We've seen that business went down in terms of travel, but obviously now things are getting better. But there's also threats that are in the pipeline. You always hear that there could be another pandemic and so on. How do we make sure that we're prepared for those kind of discussion? Because the dependence of the tourism market, if you have a bigger slice of the tourism market because of COVID and leisure business has gone down, what are we seeing in terms of those numbers? And again, we at some point depended on the domestic market because of closure of borders and all that. How best can we prepare? Can we have discussions around some of those air connectivity issues that would enable an industry not to find itself in a difficult position that we found ourselves as an industry? I've already spoken about the aviation infrastructure. which is quite relevant and important. I think it's important to have those kind of discussions, and we can be able to understand how best do we support the institutions that are responsible to ensure that there is this kind of infrastructure. You've already spoken about, obviously, the aeronautical, non-aeronautical services that can be provided. You spoke about the duvet trade infrastructure that can be built. So let's allow some panel discussions around it. But we'll also bring in some of the key operational airline people to speak around some of those key issues. What are the experiences on the ground? And the experiences is not, as we said initially, it's not a blame game. It is simply to say that there could be a better infrastructure solution that can be put in place as opposed to a particular service that's currently been provided. It's those kind of contributions we would like to make in the industry. And then the leadership discussion goes broadly to what I said, spoke about the country, spoke about the economy, spoke about leadership as a whole. Leadership just in terms of, if I'm responsible for a particular institution, how do I ensure that I'm also able to build the right leaders within the organization? So there's a pipeline within the industry. We do hear from time to time where there's challenges around shortage of skills, whether be in the country, whether be in any particular industry. How do we ensure that we build the skill set that is required within the industry so that we don't have this kind of issues? We know some of these issues are probably because you've got other countries that are more advanced than us that are obviously poaching some of our skilled people, but we need to have a pipeline that ensures that we're able to fill those gaps. Pilots, whether your air traffic controllers and so on, if they get offered in dollars or in pounds, like yourselves, John, there, I'm sure they would be happy to take those kind of offers. But we need to build up, from a leadership point of view, an industry that is able to bring a better pipeline to supply the industry. But also because we've had a lot of the black schools or black children that have been excluded, in particular, in the industry. From a leadership point of view, what is it that we can do different to try and support and create a pipeline that would help these young girls to come on board? We've built a relationship with one of your board members, Refile, who we, in fact, have one of the people that got trained from her, starting with us in our own office. And we said, look, it's good to create these girls, bring a pipeline as an associate. We may be small. Instead of employing a permanent person in the organization, we say, this young girl has a private PPL to get into the market. Let's bring her in and admin staff within BARSA, expose her into the industry so that we create that pipeline. Girls for flying, I always forget the tagline of Refilo. But basically, we create, instead of having somebody who sits at reception who's a permanent employee, we want to create that kind of a pipeline. It's our little contribution we can make. Give them into some of our members. If Emirates wants someone, if Qatar wants someone tomorrow, we know we're using these people that we're creating that kind of a system. Is that kind of leadership, John, that we want to contribute towards broadly towards the industry? Those are really the key issues. As I said, our focus is really targeted purely in ensuring that what then happen in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? How do we make sure that while we have this macroeconomic issues, what is it that we do at industry level to support whatever government is doing and so on? Thank you, John.
I think ultimately we've seen the recovery of the industry. We've seen the projections of the growth of the industry. It's going to become a massive, if it isn't already, even bigger employer. And that employment, as you've touched on, because of technology and things, it will change, but it will still employ a huge number of people. So giving them that opportunity, I'm delighted to hear that. And it'll be great to see the team from Girls Fly program as well when we get down to Johannesburg. The other thing that you mentioned as well is leadership and the theming being accountability. You can't have leadership without accountability. Non-accountable leaders can't be leaders, or they can't be effective leaders. So I think that goes hand in hand. And the fact that the other thing that you touched on is, of course, looking at how to work together, how to collaborate. And that's where we've seen this explosion of interline agreements and these partnerships where the airlines have said, I'm not going to do that route, but I can provide the last mile delivery, or I can provide the international feed. Yeah. And there's this adult conversation of, we are only going to be stronger together rather than we're competing with each other. And forums like yours are absolutely perfect to actually bring those people who day to day may see themselves as competitors. They all want the same passenger, but they've got slightly different businesses. And they could actually benefit from working together and partnering. So I've been really encouraged. There's been a lot of difficult things that have happened, but that's been a real encouraging sign over the last few years of, I would like to see more African airlines working with African airlines. Obviously, there's a lot of international airlines working with African airlines, but I think it will come when you see the mutual benefit. Before we let you go, tell us who should be coming to the event, and anybody who's listening who is eligible, how can they find out more? And then I can put a link into the show notes.
Look, yeah, certainly. So we have a broader membership that will be attending, but beyond our membership, we've invited different stakeholders from government, be regulators, but also the private sector that provides services within our industry. You've got your ground handlers, you've got aircraft manufacturers, you've got engine manufacturers. We've invited all those to be part of this kind of program. I would also say that those that are aspiring to be part of the industry and they've been knocking on doors. This kind of sessions enables one to be able to build the right network, to hear the conversations that are more relevant in the industry that would help them to obviously identify a market or a gap that they can enter into the market and build those kind of network. We invite those. At this point in time, I think we're quite happy to put up Sarah's number on your podcast, and also obviously Google BARSA. BARSA is BARSA on LinkedIn and as well as Facebook.
Team.
You can also go through our website, which is www.barsa.co.za. But for the purpose of the conference, we're quite happy for any contact to be made with Sarah.
Yeah, I'll put the link to the website in the show notes so people can go straight there. And then when you get on the website, there's a button that says Summit 2024. So you can click there. It takes you to the event, to the event website as well. But we can put Sarah's details there too. So no worries at all. But yeah, don't just Google it. 'Cause if you Google Barca, you do get Barcelona, the football team, quite often, and lots of social media information about Barcelona. But it's a cool name, and I think a lot of people like it. So thank you so much, George. That's a really great preview. I'm really looking forward to being back in South Africa, first trip to SA this year. So I can't wait to be there and be part of the event and see it in person and meet up with new friends, old friends, and plot a course for South African aviation going forward, because it's one of the big success stories of the country and of the continent. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. You have, like you say, lots of competition, lots of successful airlines offering different things and different routes. And hopefully it's going to go from strength to strength. And thank you for your part in shaping that future. So thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you, John. I think thanks to the AviaDev team as well. We always happy for you guys being part of the community of developing aviation internationally. So we're excited about the summit. Looking forward to seeing you, John, as always.
Perfect. Yeah, it's another great example of collaboration, right? And that'd be great because, of course, the Barca team comes to AviaDev, AviaDev comes to Barca. We all want the same thing, which is a more progressive, more successful, more profitable African aviation industries. We're very excited. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. If you did enjoy the episode, or if there's somebody that you think should have a listen to this that would be interested, do hit the share button and share that now with somebody in your network. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and we'll be back for the very next episode very shortly. So thanks for joining us, and all the best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John.